Hello friends, how are you? It's great to see you here again. I believe we all know about the various incidents that happen on the highways of the United States. Nurses, witches, animals running alongside cars, and entities chasing families in the middle of nowhere, in the darkness of the night or under the moonlight. On today's broadcast, we will share with you some stories from the rulers of the roads. Yes, I'm referring to the truckers who traverse and trace the entire state at all hours of the day. Let's begin. You are listening to Dark Secret. Are you ready for this? My Uncle Victor died at a young age of 44. Just like my dad and my grandfather, he was also a trucker and followed the family tradition of taking the country's roads and transport routes for many years. As a truck driver during that time, he had never experienced anything strange, just witnessing accidents and animals crossing the road, which is quite common during the night. Sometimes, unintentionally, he would hit them with the grill of his Kenworth T800. However, that would all change one night when he was driving towards Denver. At that time, due to the scale of violence prevailing on the highways, truckers were prohibited from stopping, standing still, or even picking up hitchhikers at stops and along the roads. My uncle was a calm and dedicated person to his work. He was never fearful or easily scared, claiming to have seen it all on the roads. But that particular night, after a long journey, many things would change for him. He said he was on a high mountain road. Suddenly, the radio started to have a lot of static, and the CB band was the same, eventually losing the signal completely. However, sometimes he could hear faint voices in the distance, echoes of people trying to communicate, maybe fellow truckers. Some truckers who frequented that area often said that the mountains caused the interference. But there was something more, something strange that my uncle didn't like at all. Later, as he continued his journey, he became very drowsy and eager to reach his destination sooner. He recounted that after a sharp curve, his truck's headlights illuminated what seemed to be a person walking by the side of the road. It wasn't unusual to see people from time to time, but it was strange because she was in the middle of the mountains with no nearby towns or houses, in an area where there was nothing. His surprise grew as he approached, and he decided to slow down. He turned on the high beams and saw that the person was a woman. He thought she might be one of those women who walked along the roadside, picked up by truckers in exchange for some favors, but it was unusual for this mountainous area, far from any settlement, and especially for her to walk in complete darkness without any guidance. A sinister thought lodged in his mind, thinking that perhaps by giving her a ride, he could have a pleasant time with her in the cabin. He didn't hesitate and started pulling over, stopping a few meters away from the girl, close enough to illuminate her with the headlights. As he approached, he saw that she was a very attractive young woman, and her clothing accentuated her body's provocative curves, inviting one to lose themselves in them. Without wanting to miss the opportunity, he anxiously observed as the woman moved with a slow and feline gait towards him, asking for a lift to the nearest town. With a sweet and melodic voice, she pleaded for him not to leave her, as it was late, and she feared falling off the cliff or being stalked by one of the many nocturnal beasts in the mountains. Although, at first glance, my uncle couldn't distinguish the woman's features, he noticed that she had very penetrating and almost hypnotizing black eyes, which made him agree to give her a ride despite knowing that he couldn't do it and that the risk of losing his job with the company was quite high. After she got into the truck, he started the engine, and with some strangeness, he saw that she was carrying a large leather-bound book with pages that looked very old, with a yellowish-brown color. She placed this book between her legs and then rubbed her arms, indicating that she was feeling uncomfortable, probably from the cold. This action caused her dress to ride up a bit, revealing that she was not wearing any underwear or a bra. The young woman's attributes quickly diverted my uncle's thoughts, and he began to strike up a conversation with her to break the ice and persuade her in one way or another. She, being condescending, continued the conversation, talking about different things she had seen on the road. Throughout the conversation, the woman kept rubbing her arms, and my uncle took advantage of this to get a little closer, offering her some of the clothes he had in the back of the truck. Amidst the talk and laughter, things escalated a bit. However, the woman showed no signs of fear or distress about being in the middle of nowhere with a man thirsty for pleasure. This, truthfully, sounds very strange and almost like something from a horror movie, but that's how it happened. She did not refuse the lascivious caresses from that man. However, at the slight touch of his hands on the book's spine, he felt a burning cold, as if his skin had been scorched by dry ice. This made him shiver, and he quickly withdrew his hand from the place he was trying to grab, holding onto the steering wheel as he took a sharp curve. Shortly after taking it, an unusual cold filled the truck's cabin, and the woman made grimaces of displeasure, indicating that she felt a little dizzy. My uncle invited her to rest in the sleeper cabin, and without hesitation, she settled in the berth. My uncle began searching for a place to stop the truck, but to his bad luck, he was in the middle of the Sierra and accelerated to get out of that area as soon as possible and find a rest stop. The cold in the cabin became so uncomfortable that, despite having the heater on, it wasn't enough. After a while, he heard the woman mumbling something, murmuring under her breath. It seemed like she was in some kind of prayer. When he asked if everything was okay, she didn't respond in any way and continued with those strange whispers. Combined with the chilling feeling in the cabin, my uncle felt a great unease, as something was not right that night. Suddenly, the sweet voice he had heard before turned into a hoarse and hateful voice, cursing and saying strange things.
"It smells like pure shit in here,"
she said contemptuously. "What are you talking about, woman? How can you smell shit?" My uncle asked, perplexed, hearing her voice change completely, and he tried to find a rest stop. He saw a small clearing by the roadside. He parked the truck as best as he could and turned on the hazard lights, turning towards the sleeper cabin. He asked again what smelled like shit, as he couldn't perceive any nauseating odor.
"Is that medal you're wearing and that Bible under the blanket? Get rid of them because I can't read my cursed book, you filthy pig."
The woman said with utter disdain. This statement greatly shocked my uncle, and suddenly a strong stench filled his nose. Indeed, it smelled like rancid excrement and aged urine. He moved closer, trying to bear the stench, and when he turned on the light in the cabin, he felt his blood freeze as an electric shock ran from his head to his legs. Tremors shook his body, punishing his limbs. The sight of what was once a beautiful woman with alluring curves, now transformed into a haggard old woman with matted hair and greenish skin covered in filthy seams emitting a foul odor, was terrifying. My uncle almost vomited at the sight of the transformation from a beautiful woman to a repulsively ugly old woman. Her obscene dress revealed a repulsive mass of hair that protruded from between her legs, where she rested the end of the book. That place seemed to emit some kind of vapor, which also caused a very strange stench. Terrified and disgusted, my uncle immediately got off the truck and opened the cabin hatch, struggling with the old woman, who tried to stay inside. After a struggle, he managed to pull her out, hitting and cursing her, and he lifted her with all his strength to throw her off the cliff. The old woman fell rolling down the rocks and bushes, disappearing into the darkness, screaming in pain and cursing my uncle. He then took the blanket that covered the mattress and used it to wrap up the strange book, which he also threw off the cliff. He ran as fast as he could and got back into the truck to get away from there as quickly as possible. The engine roared, accelerating the truck, while he prayed and clung to the steering wheel, constantly checking the mirrors and sweating profusely. He wished with all his soul that the disgusting old woman wouldn't follow him or climb onto the truck bed. The journey was long and terrifying, and when he finally left the Sierra to reach the first town, he felt relief and a little calmness. Nervous and still nauseous, he had the truck, the cabin, and the sleeper cabin washed to remove the stench that haunted him for several weeks. Since that day, no trip was ever the same for my uncle. He would comment that every curve resembling the one from that night reminded him of the experience he had lived. He spent the rest of his life living in fear of encountering that woman again and would break out in cold sweats when passing through the same spot late at night. A lot of time passed before he could recover from that encounter. After retiring from the roads and before he passed away, he told us this story, starting with much trepidation, recounting how he had encountered a witch on the road. Thank you for listening.
Sugar Halls.
Hello, friends. I recently discovered your channel and I decided to share a terrifying experience I had on the road. I hope you never go through what I experienced that night. I am a trucker, and from a young age, I started in this profession. My late father used to take me on his trips along the country's roads, and I learned to drive a truck as soon as I could reach the pedals. I became an experienced trucker like my father and worked for many companies. I never experienced anything strange, nothing beyond all sorts of accidents caused by the recklessness or stupidity of some people. I carried many passengers in my cabin, from whom I learned things, and they told me stories about roads and legends that you could find in towns through which I commonly passed, but nothing unusual happened to me. I didn't see anything strange for many years. But my luck ran out, and I experienced something that left a mark on me for a long time, and I still remember and feel uneasy about it. At that time, I was living in New Orleans and started working for a sugarcane line that transported sugar. I was driving a Kenworth with the trailer full of the product. I left Louisiana heading to Pennsylvania. The road was quiet and without any incidents. As I approached the delivery point, there was a military checkpoint where a long line of truckers were waiting to be inspected. It was unavoidable, so I relaxed and waited for my turn. Fortunately, we passed through quickly, but something strange happened. When I was at the checkpoint, a soldier asked me to step out of the truck while others inspected the cabin and asked me where I was heading. I answered that I was heading to Pennsylvania to deliver sugar. They checked my documents, the manifest, and seconds later, I was driving again. I felt like I had driven about 6 kilometers when, in the distance, I saw something coming along the roadside. It was early in the morning, so I flashed my high beams, and as I got closer, I realized it was a woman with strange red hair, wearing a white floral dress and a denim jacket. Her flat-top shoes were shining in a peculiar way. The weirdest thing was that she seemed to be standing by the roadside without moving and staring ahead. I felt some fear because when you see people like that, there's a risk they might throw themselves under the truck's wheels. So, I flashed my lights several times as a warning and slowed down to be cautious. But as I passed her, I noticed that she was facing away from me, which didn't seem strange because I had seen her looking ahead before. All I could see was her red hair and the dress fluttering in the wind. Thinking that maybe she needed help, I did what I wasn't supposed to do, but curiosity got the best of me and I stopped a few meters ahead. There wasn't much traffic, so it wasn't a problem to stop. I got off the truck and ran towards the girl. When I saw her, I noticed that she had her head lowered, seemingly sad or preoccupied. As I approached, I asked if she was okay or if I could give her a ride. But when I mentioned the ride, the girl turned around in a very strange way. It was quite fast, as if reality was seen frame by frame, and in an instant, what was supposed to be the face of a beautiful young woman turned out to be nothing. There was an enormous dark and eerie hole in the middle of her head. Seeing this, fear overwhelmed me, and I backed away, trying to get away from that horrible sight. I fell to the ground as I looked at that thing with its face pointed directly at me. I crawled back, never taking my eyes off her. When I stood up, I ran as fast as I could, with my heart pounding out of my chest. I got back into the truck, and as I drove off, I didn't want to look back, but in the rearview mirror, I felt like the faceless girl would suddenly reappear. I concentrated and revved the engine to the maximum to gain speed and get away as far as possible. It was something I couldn't believe, but I had seen it, and I felt so cold that I began to shiver and feel sick to my stomach. When I finally reached Pennsylvania, several truckers were already waiting to unload. I parked the truck and got off, vomiting. I felt terribly ill and was shaking uncontrollably. Some truckers who were nearby approached me and asked me what was wrong. I couldn't speak, so I sat down and took some water they offered me. After calming down a bit, I started to tell them what I had seen on the road before arriving. I expected them to look at me strangely or think I was a drug addict or crazy, but instead, they looked at me sympathetically. The oldest one said that, indeed, a faceless woman always appeared in that stretch. According to local folklore, the woman had been run over at that spot, and her head had been smashed to pieces. However, others had a more believable version. They said that the young woman had been thrown in that spot, and the trucker who had thrown her used a sledgehammer to crush her face, which perhaps explained the terrifying appearance of her face. The truth is that no one gave me a convincing reason to believe them or to explain this paranormal situation. I didn't want to know more about the matter, and after delivering the merchandise, I had to return to the company. I spent many days unable to sleep, having nightmares, and feeling like the girl was getting into the cabin. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see her sitting next to me. Undoubtedly, that had me quite tense, and my family had to calm me down from my fright. I seemed to have calmed down a bit, but then they sent me again to carry sugar to Louisiana. That made me very nervous, and I didn't want to panic, so I composed myself and drove without any further issues. It was around 10 o'clock at night when I once again stopped at the military checkpoint. A soldier who came to inspect me asked me the same question as before, and I answered the same way. But when I mentioned my destination, he looked surprised, and a smile appeared on his face, which made me uncomfortable. He asked if I had crossed myself before leaving for Louisiana, and I replied that I had, but I felt like trembling. I told him I always did it because I knew there were many criminal problems in the area. The soldier responded with a chilling affirmation, "Well, yes, criminals, but besides that, several truckers and buses have reported seeing the dead girl appearing on the stretch ahead. We sent a patrol, but we can't do anything about supernatural matters." Without saying anything else, he kept laughing while I started sweating in my hands. I didn't want to see that disturbing woman again. I started the truck and drove away quickly. Just as I was about to cross the stretch where I had seen that spirit or demon dressed as a woman, I was relieved to see that there was nothing there. I passed without looking back and thanked God for sparing me from seeing her again. That's what I was thinking when, in the rearview mirror, I saw something peering from the back of the trailer. It was the perforated head of the young woman. Seeing this, I gave a slight swerve that almost sent me off the road. This was impossible. I looked again, and she was gone. When I arrived back in Pennsylvania, I was in a terrible state again. Fear clouded my mind, and I couldn't even maneuver the truck, so some colleagues had to help me that night. You'll understand that I didn't want to return immediately. I waited until dawn to return, and as soon as I did, I quit the company. I never drove in those parts again out of fear that something would appear on the road. Good night. The greetings for this week go to Roberto Valueta, the 5 stars. Evolving Humanoid, Boomer 271. Dear friends, thank you very much for joining me in this broadcast. You would help me a lot if you subscribe, activate the bell, and leave your thumbs up along with a comment. I'm always reading to respond to you. What you see on the screen is the channel's WhatsApp number in case you have any stories, evidence, photographs, videos, or audio of the terrifying and paranormal events you have experienced or are experiencing at the moment. And if you still have the courage to listen to another one of our horror stories, I have one on the screen to accompany you for the rest of this night. See you in the next broadcast of
Dark Secret.